Hey everybody, and welcome to Epic Everyday, our weekday podcast for busy, overwhelmed Christians who want to stop living in fantasy and start living in freedom and abundance and peace. I'm Liz Ferricks, and this is my husband, Evan.
Hello.
Who's over here trying to make me lose my composure while I'm doing the intro.
No. Why would you accuse
Whatever.
me of that?
If you're new to our show, we work our way through the CSCs. They are Tai Chi principles that we have found really are the pathway to moving out of that crazy, overwhelmed place. They are being calm, surrendered, centered, connected, and complete. So we do one every day of the week. Set it up to help remind us and everybody who's listening that those are still important.
Yeah, and they're physical principles with spiritual truths. And we can move in each of those ways intentionally in the physical world and the spiritual world. That's what we love about.
So this week, as promised, we are talking about addiction.
Yes.
Which is such a timely topic for this time of year. I mean, I feel like the stress of the holidays, it just makes whatever is already going on worse or better.
Addiction
does? No, the holidays.
Oh, yeah.
Like, because you're adding all this pressure.
An accelerator? Isn't it?
Yeah, something like that. Something along the lines of it just adds to what's already happening. It's like a magnifying glass to show you what's actually going on in your life, which can be really helpful.
Yeah,
it can also be
true.
really stressful.
Right, it probably definitely stressful, but yeah, it can reveal truth, can't it?
Yeah.
And that's always a good thing. So, before you knew you struggled with addiction, Liz, did you think you knew anybody who had any addiction?
I was young enough that it didn't even cross my mind.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm trying to think for me too. I think I probably thought, some people struggle with that, but I don't know anybody.
Interesting.
But that's not the way we think about it now.
No. Yeah, at this point, I think that 99% of people have some kind of addiction. You know? Like, if you haven't intentionally made sure you don't have an addiction, you probably do have an addiction. Whether that is, addiction to TV or, binge watching your latest show.
Well, I think some of the time, there's any number of things, but I think people, if they're not in that mindset, they're like, they don't realize what they're doing. And we're going to talk about anxiety later, but I think they're also like, just not hurting anybody. It's just me watching TV or me having a beer or looking at pornography. Like, who's it hurting?
Right. Yeah. Well, and I mean, really the answer is themselves. Yeah. Maybe you're not hurting anybody else, but I've talked before about how addiction is like a fire and how addiction is the flames and the coals is the baggage that we're carrying around. And then, there's something that happens, like an inciting incident, whether that is, not being able to find your keys or, something small that all of a sudden erupts into this huge thing. And, every time we use our addiction to cope with those coals, it's another day that we're carrying that baggage. Mm-hmm. And we don't even realize how stressful that is.
Yeah. And it's a lie that it's not hurting anybody. Because like you were getting at, I mean, because it breaks down our relationships with other people. So
and
it
with
hurts the
God.
people around us. Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing. If you're turning to an addiction, you're not turning to the Lord.
And then the flip side of that is, well, it's not hurting anybody. It's just this thing I do is, well, what are you gaining from it?
Yeah.
The answer is probably nothing.
Well, I mean, it does lower your stress level while you're engaging in it. The problem is that addictions actually add to our anxiety. Like we engage in the addiction to try to manage our stress. But then because of the resultant shame or isolation or just we've talked a lot about emotional compound interest. So just carrying that baggage another day, every day that you're carrying it, kind of adds more to that emotional compound interest.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, you have more stress because of the addiction, which then leads you to engage in the addiction to try to handle that stress. It's this downward spiral where it really is like, pushing a rock off the top of a hill, and if you don't have something to stop the rock, it just goes.
Yeah. So what addiction really does is brings a fake calm, right? A
Yeah.
little lull, and it actually just delays your anxiety till later. And it doesn't
Right.
deal with anything, right?
Right. Well, and the reason we have that is because we don't actually have the neural pathways to process our anxiety at the moment. So, in some ways, it can be a good thing to take a step back. The problem is when we use, those coping mechanisms to escape our anxiety permanently versus doing the work of developing new neural pathways and then, dealing with our stress then.
Yeah, and I think it's tricky too because we can get caught up in shame when we're like, oh, well, I should do what you just said, build some neural pathways and move on and grow and stuff. When in reality, and we've got a counselor friend who presented this to our church, is talking about the addiction grows out of everyone's trauma from growing up, and everybody has trauma
Right.
growing up. And as kids, it's trial and error, and we're like, oh, when I steal, like it gives me a rush and it helps me cope with something somehow. And maybe you become a kleptomaniac, you become addicted
Right.
to that because it was an escape. So there's always something we're trying to escape from. I'm trying to bring it down to a level where, because we feel so strongly that everybody has these vices. And maybe that I like that word better than addiction,
Yeah.
because some people would maybe admit they had a vice. Maybe it's sports or
Chocolate.
yeah, like it's harmless stuff, right? But it's a sign of something deeper. It's
Right.
something stealing our calm and robbing us of our peace, the peace that God wants us to have, and we're settling for this really superficial, really fake kind of temporary peace that we get when we take a drag off that cigarette or whatever it is.
Yeah. I love in Headspace, which is that meditation app that we use before bed, and how the guy that runs it talks about, learning how to be quiet with yourself, like to sit in silence and be okay with that, and how that's so hard for some people. And I think you see that in our society. Like, I know I struggle with that, just sitting still and not letting my
Yeah,
brain run a million miles an hour. And I've told you guys before, when I first started taking Tai Chi, I was having relaxation induced panic attacks because my body was like, no, relaxing means you're off guard and that's not a safe thing to do. So instead of relaxing, I'm going to throw you into hyper panic.
yeah. And I think that manifests in our culture too. We just can't really be quiet. I mean,
Right.
maybe the TV's always on or the radio or it's noise, just the people in your house or whatever. Like getting a quiet moment and then being in that stillness, that could be a little test of like
Yeah.
the thing you're reaching for first to break that tension, whether it's your phone or, because you're going to start being like, oh, I should text somebody, or,
Right.
it's like that's drawing you out of the stillness there. And there can be peace there, but it's so difficult.
Yeah. It takes a lot of work to learn to deal with those things. So it's not like you're constantly, and I feel like for myself, when I was struggling with addiction, it was like I had this closet full of skeletons and it was overflowing. And so any second that I was still, it was like it came, popping open like a jack in the box or something. And so I was constantly like pushing on it, keeping it closed, keeping it closed, keeping it closed, keeping it closed. Like, and I didn't even realize it because it had become second nature.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I stopped doing that stuff and started dealing with some of my issues that I realized how stressed out I had been. I mean, I was just so
It's a
used
lot
to
of
it.
work keeping it down
Right.
and under wraps.
Right. I I didn't even realize that it was stealing my peace all the time,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I was doing some processing on an addiction of mine, and I was coming to that realization too of like something's wrong, obviously, but I'd learned from my childhood somehow to, if I make a mistake, to hide it instead of
Yeah.
confessing it to somebody trustworthy, and especially to God, and
Mm-hmm.
processing through the like that failure, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And but that became a big enmeshed part of my addiction, because then it's like, well, I'm just gonna keep hiding all this stuff,
Right.
and yeah, like you're saying, keeping that closet closed or keeping those secrets secret, it like becomes
It's
a full time
hard.
job,
Yeah.
and then you're working overtime. Even it's
Yeah.
it's a lot.
Yeah. And as I said, we don't even realize how stressful it is until we stop doing it. Um, and chronic pain is the same way. And after dealing with chronic pain for years and years, once my pain levels started going down, I was like, whoa, I have so much more energy. I just didn't realize what a drag it was emotionally and physically on my body.
I just feel normal, and I'm just like, this is amazing. So like having to live under that like that cloud forever.
Yeah. And that's what we do. I mean, that's a symptom. That's addiction is a symptom of that, of living under that cloud of stress, that internal, childhood trauma stuff, and trauma is defined as anything your brain is not ready to handle.
Yeah, right. It's
So,
not like you got shot in the leg or something.
right.
It could be
It could
like if
be
you're a
huge
soldier.
things,
Yeah,
right? Or it could just be stuff that your brain was like, whoa,
yeah. And
not expecting that.
and that's why growing up, there's going to be trauma there to deal with, because that's part of growing up is your brain's learning how to deal with new things all the
Right.
time.
At least for me, when it was like, hey, just the thought of even trying to tackle my addiction was so overwhelming
Hmm.
once I was far enough in, and it was just like, I don't even know where to start. And so, if you're in a place like that, I really encourage you to start with doing some tapping. I'm always
Hmm.
going to recommend that because that's one of the big trauma things I've found that's helped that you can do by yourself. There are loads of other ones that we could recommend that are more,
Well, yeah, and even more what like community oriented.
yeah, more
Yeah,
community or, require a therapist,
sure.
like someone who's certified. But tapping is something you
I
can do by yourself at home.
and I think you could do so much work with one or two trusted friends. It
Yeah.
helps if you're struggling with the same thing, but mostly what is required is an attitude of understanding from everybody. Like I may not struggle with chocolate chip cookies like you do, but I'm struggling with cigarettes or alcohol or whatever it is, or
Yeah.
pornography. And if everybody understands that it's a different brand of the same thing, and
Right.
the the trauma and the overwhelm of not being able to handle emotions is what's really underneath it all,
Yeah.
then that can be, I mean, just talking about the feelings of temptation when it happens, trying to figure out what your pattern is. Usually there's a ritual involved,
Mm-hmm.
especially if it's something you're trying to not do. I mean, if you're not trying to quit, there may be a ritual, but it's so transparent because you just do it, and there's no friction because you're not trying to quit. But if you're
Right.
trying to quit and you examine it, usually a pattern emerges. Examining that can be very illuminating.
Yeah. And just even doing tapping on the fact that you want to start working on it. I think I've shared with you guys before with my financial hangups. Like, I had so much financial stress and trauma that just the idea of sitting down to look at our budget was like, made me want to hyperventilate. And so it wasn't until I started tapping on the like, what if I was okay with starting to look at this stuff? What would that look like? Could I be okay with it? That I was even able to handle the thought of maybe we should deal with our finances better?
Yeah, it's very overwhelming. So I definitely with prayer and tapping, but I think having a partner or two or three is so
Mm-hmm.
important too, because it's gonna be too much to handle. I mean,
Right.
that's why we're using the vice.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, hopefully that gives us all some things we can think about. As usual, 1% improvement. So maybe it's just even thinking about asking God to show you where you struggle with vices. because sometimes we don't see it in our own hearts.
Yeah, or try to do that sit still for 5 minutes and not do anything test and be quiet and see if it's peaceful or not.
Yeah. We love you guys, and we are praying for you. Hope that you had a lovely holidays last weekend. And thanks to everybody that's been sharing the show. We really appreciate it. If you have found this podcast helpful, please do continue to share it with your friends. We firmly believe the more people who are living in the CSCs, the healthier the entire body of Christ is. All right, come back tomorrow, and we're going to talk some more about addiction and surrender and how those things go together.
Yeah.
Or don't.
We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.
Bye.